I'd really like to spend my time now just explaining how that I think the transgender movement ought to be something of an I told you so moment for Christians. And I don't mean that arrogantly. I mean that simply because ever since the moment described by those words, in the beginning, God created, God has revealed his purposes and design for creation. In those words, we're given so many answers, including the crux of the answer to the transgender issue. Because when God created the universe, he impressed on it certain laws and principles from which it can never really depart, and to which he intended it to conform as long as it exists. And some of those laws can't be bent and they can't be broken, like gravity. But some of them, through human ingenuity, through rebellion, through our own wills, can be attacked and can be undermined. We can attack, for example, the call that is upon us to image God, a call that rests on each of us as God's creatures. And I think I'll read to you some familiar words in that regard, which goes straight to the issue that we've been discussing this evening. So God created man in his own image. In the image of God he created him, male and female he created them. And God blessed them, and God said to them, "Be fruitful and multiply and fill the earth." Now, I don't fully understand it, but it is central to the call to image God that we are made male and female in God's design. In the image of God, he created them, male and female. He created them, it says. And therefore, the transgender movement, it really does attack at the root of God's purposes for creation. It actually attacks the call of God upon humanity. It attacks creation itself. It denies that the purposes and the designs of God are good, and it actually dethrones God as creator, and it puts us, our own desires, our own feelings, into his place. But again, that can't be a surprise for us as Christians. And I say that because this is the timeless and fundamental sin of the human race. Our first parents fell. Why? I quote from Genesis 3, it was a particular desire, and it was a desire to be like God. Likewise in Romans 1, when Paul diagnoses how societies go astray without God, he nails the nub of the issue with these words in verse 25. He says, "They exchange the truth about God for the lie and worship and serve creature rather than creator." The truth in this context that society rejects is the truth about God as creator. The lie that they embrace, with which it is replaced, is this notion that God is dethroned and the creature is in his place as creator. Because, the human race, according to what we believe and know as Christians, gets too big for its boots. We step outside of our own jurisdiction. We go outside and above our limits. And just as our first parents, we fall for the trap of wishing to be like God. And it's no surprise then to me, working at ACL, and I'm sure no surprise to us, that so many of the presenting social and moral policy issues of our time attack the timeless truths of God's creation. Family is a creation ordinance. Life is part of creation. Gender, as we're discussing tonight, is part of creation. Sex is part of creation in both senses of the word. And we ask how many ways and in how many times have those things been attacked in our modern era? And we ask, well, why? Well, simple. As we're told, we are the creators now. A man who's 6'6" with hairy hands can make himself a woman in a moment of decision, and it is true, he is a woman, and everybody must conform to his new reality. He's made it so. A union of two people of the same sex can be called a marriage by the stroke of a legislative pen, because we have declared by legislation that it is true. Therefore, it's true. A birth certificate, as Wendy was just telling us, can be modified. How? Well, gender can be changed. Birth parents can be changed. Because the very reality of history can be rewritten because we wish it was different. I say again, we are the creators now. That's where we go as a society. Except, of course, as we've seen tonight so clearly, except that it doesn't work. Romans 1 tells us very clearly that this self-proclaimed wisdom turns us into fools. And that's become obvious, I think, now more than ever. Wendy alluded to the case of the New Zealand weightlifter, a female weightlifter who is surprisingly outlifting all the other women in the competition. Why? Because it's a man, with a man's body, with a man's muscles, therefore he's winning. Senator Linda Reynolds from Western Australia recently said that we should de-gender all sports. And one of the political commentators said, well, sure, let's start with boxing. Bruce Jenner, who says, call me Caitlyn Jenner, won Woman of the Year recently. So it seems now women can do anything except be women. That's Bruce's job. Qantas has said that they cannot use, well, they've recommended that their staff don't use language like ladies and gentlemen. I was just on a Qantas flight just then. It was the only one available, actually. I tried Virgin. But I was on a Qantas flight just then, and there's nothing more obvious about those in the cabin around me, that they are men and women. It's foolishness, as Paul said it is, and it's obvious. But I want to say this. I want to say that it's actually worse than that, and this came through in what Wendy said. It's not actually just an issue of wisdom and foolishness. It's a matter of light and darkness. We laugh at the foolishness, and that is obviously fitting in many cases. But we shouldn't forget that the darkness of a false ideology is a serious thing, and that is seen in its fruits. I read a most heartbreaking legal case recently, and it was the case of a 15-year-old girl coming out of our own family court here in Australia who was approved for a double mastectomy because she thinks she's a boy. And you know, by now, her body will be scarred forever. There's no going back. Carrie, one of the people that Ryan talked about, the woman that said, I'm a 22-year-old woman with a 5 o'clock shadow and a broken voice and a scarred chest. She transitioned socially at the same age, underwent the puberty blockers, the hormone therapy, and ultimately the surgery, and then she produced that video. That was the end for her. That's where it led her to that situation. And this is heartbreaking stuff. These are lives that we're dealing with, and these are lives of children. And, you know, I often find there's a certain sense, you know, in the way that adults make errors, make mistakes, and do wrong, and we reap the fruit of our way, as Proverbs says. There's a sense in that. It's tragic, but there's a sense in it. But the real tragedy of our time is that those who are innocent, who have done nothing wrong, who are young and have only been brought up under false ideologies and been taught false things, they are now suffering. And the biblical maxim that the sins of the fathers are visited on the children to the third and fourth generation is coming true in our age. There's a certain sense in which there's a great tragedy in that, or there is a great tragedy in that. And consider the confusion being rained down through the things that we went through tonight, the gender-bred person, the gender unicorn, the teaching resources that Wendy put up on the screen, and children who are asked to imagine what it must feel like to be a non-binary genderqueer trapped in a woman's body when they are confused. Surprise, surprise. They may socially transition. They may go on the pathway of puberty blockers. They may end up in a very broken situation. And you know, many who discourage activism by the church on social issues like this, I think there's a failure to recognise two things. There's a failure to recognise, firstly, the darkness of evil, what it does, and just how bad it is when these things gain ascendancy and who suffers. There is no love of neighbour in ignoring this. Secondly, a failure to realise that God seeks truth tellers. I was reading Isaiah not long ago, and I was just interested to see in chapter 59 where God condemns a nation where, and I quote, it says, truth has stumbled in the public square and righteousness cannot enter. Justice is turned back and truth is lacking. And I wonder whether or not that is, well, I don't wonder, I know that that is increasingly true of our time. And God seeks voices for truth. Isaiah, that's in Isaiah, and it was only a few chapters before in chapter 6 that God said, who will go? Who can I send? Who will go for us? And he was looking for Isaiah to go and speak those words in his culture and to his people. He seeks truth tellers. But you know, it says there in the next verse, it says that those who speak truth make themselves a prey. And I think that's a very powerful image. We think of people like Israel Folau. We think of people like Margaret Court. We think of people who put their head above the parapet in the public square and they get shot at. They make themselves into a target. And again, those are the times that we live in. But may the very next verse, verse 14 of Isaiah 59, never be true of us. It says there, and the Lord saw it and marveled that there was no one to intercede. See, God seeks truth tellers. He wants someone to bring truth into the public square. He wants righteousness not to be turned back any longer. And that's why at ACL we speak truth, we trust. That's our goal. We're a voice for values. We speak into the public square. We speak at events like this in a desire to equip all of you to be a voice wherever you are for truth in this society. And how great it is to be a voice for truth when the truth is on our side. How great it is when we have the truth because it's been revealed to us. As I said, all this is so, but there's a sense in which it's because God said. We know from Scripture that God said that this is the way things are. So it's small wonder that when Ryan comes up here, the science says that it is so. It's small wonder that when we look at the fruits of the ideology, we see the brokenness and disaster that it brings in. Because we know, and we've been given the truth, and we have the answers for this world and the answers that this world craves. And so as Christians, I want to encourage us to be that voice for truth that God seeks.